Rain poured over the ruined city, turning the streets into rivers of ash and oil, while above the broken skyline, the alien broadcast filled the air with a voice that seemed to echo inside every mind. The alien commander stood on a platform surrounded by banners of his empire, and behind him floated holograms showing battles where human soldiers fell one after another. His sharp fangs caught the light as he spoke, calling humans weak, soft creatures that had no right to fight in a galaxy built for the strong, and his words were carried across space to every corner where survivors hid or fought. Daniel Rane sat in a dark corner of the human outpost, staring at the flickering image on the wall screen. He was not the tallest or strongest soldier here, in fact. Many thought he should never have joined the war, because before the invasion, he had been just an engineer fixing broken machines. But now, with Earth burning, there was no one left who could afford to stay behind the alien commander. Began laughing, a slow, cruel laugh that seemed to crawl under the skin of every listener, and then he singled out a name, Daniel Rane, the weak human, the one who had run from the front lines last month, the one whose hands shook when holding a rifle. Soldiers around Daniel turned to look at him, some with pity, others with frustration. Daniel felt heat in his chest, not from shame, but from something sharper and colder. He did not look away from the broadcast, he just whispered under his breath. "They will remember my name, even if it is the last thing I do." The rain outside grew heavier and alarms began to sound in the outpost, enemy movement near the perimeter. Orders came fast. Daniel was assigned to a recon mission at the edge of alien territory. The commanders wanted to know if the enemy was building forward bases, but most soldiers knew recon. This deep was a death sentence. Still, Daniel took the order without complaint, moving through the mud and shadow until the lights of the alien energy station appeared on the horizon. It was massive, its towers stabbing into the clouds, glowing with strange blue fire. Daniel pulled his binoculars closer, and his breath caught in his throat. He had seen alien weapons before, but this was different. This was a heart-pumping power into something far bigger than a city. He scanned the perimeter, counting guards and drones, when a sound behind him made him freeze, a faint click like a weapon being armed. Slowly he turned and saw them. Squad of aliens, their armor black and wet with rain surrounding him from all sides. Their leader stepped forward, eyes glowing like molten stone, and spoke with the same cruel voice Daniel had heard on the broadcast. "So the weak human thinks he can spy on us," the alien said. Mockery in every word. The others laughed, the sound cold and sharp. Daniel's pulse hammered, but his mind was already working, calculating the distance to the nearest wall. The gap between the two guards on his left, the weight of the knife strapped to his thigh, and the dark shapes of the vents on the side of the tower. The alien leader raised his weapon, slowly aiming it at Daniel's head. Any last words? Human. Daniel met his eyes, and for a moment the rain seemed to pause around them. Then he spoke quietly, but clearly, "You should have killed me before you said my name." The rain had turned into a heavy mist, wrapping the alien energy station in a pale blue haze as Daniel stood with the circle of armored soldiers, closing in their leader's weapon steady, and his molten eyes fixed on him. The laughter from the alien ranks was low and mocking, like the sound of blades being drawn, but Daniel did not move. Instead, he let his fingers curl slowly around the small metal device in his palm, a harmless scanner barely bigger than a coin. But the aliens did not know that he lifted it just enough for its red light to glow faintly through the mist, and in a steady voice he said, "If I drop this, your entire station will vanish before you take another breath." The laughter stopped as quickly as it had begun. The alien leader tilted his head, the blue glow from the towers painting his sharp jawline in light. "You lie, humans do not have such weapons." Daniel's eyes stayed on his, and his voice did not shake. "Then pull the trigger and find out for yourself." The leader's claw flexed on the weapon grip, but the others shifted uneasily. No one wanted to be the fool who triggered something they did not understand. Daniel took a slow step back toward the shadows, his heart pounding with each movement. The leader snarled orders in their alien tongue. But Daniel was already gone, slipping into the narrow service trench at the base of the station the metal was. Slick under his boots, and the sound of alien voices behind him grew louder. He moved faster, weaving between pipes and panels until he found the opening to a vent just wide enough to crawl through. Inside, it was pitch black, the smell of burnt metal and chemicals clinging to the air. Daniel crawled until the noise of pursuit faded. Then he opened the small pouch at his belt and took out a camera barely larger than his hand. With silent precision, he snapped images of the control panels, the patrol, routes, and the strange glowing core at the heart of the station before sliding the device back into place. He turned to leave but stopped as voices drifted through the vent ahead. These were different, lower, more urgent. The words were alien, but Daniel had learned enough of their language to catch pieces. They spoke of another enemy, something the aliens feared more than humans, a fleet moving in the dark beyond the rim of the galaxy. Daniel's mind raced. If this was true, the war was larger than anyone knew, and humans were just a small part of it. He crawled onward, emerging near the outer wall of the station, and from there slipped into the mist toward the hills. The journey back to the outpost was long and silent, but the images burned. In his mind, when he arrived, the commanders listened to his report with cold eyes, their disbelief obvious. One of them, an old colonel, leaned forward and said, "Rane, I sent you to watch, not to come back with alien fairy tales. You will stick to your orders." Next time, Daniel left the room with the weight of their doubt pressing on him, but there was no time to dwell. The outpost, speakers crackled, and the alien commander's voice boomed again across the base. This time, it was not laughter. It was a promise in less than one cycle. "We will stand on the ruins of your capital city. Your leaders will kneel, and your weapons will be dust." Panic spread through the soldiers in the mess hall. Some cursed, some prayed, others simply stared at the floor. Daniel tightened his gloves and walked to the armory. He had seen the maps, he knew the alien patrol routes, and he knew the station's weak points. If command would not act, he would. And somewhere in the mist beyond the outpost walls, the alien leader was already preparing to find him again. Night draped itself over the war-torn hills as Daniel slipped out of the outpost, carrying only a rifle, a pack of rations, and the stolen images from the alien station. The cold bit into his skin, and every step crunched softly against the wet gravel. Behind him, two figures emerged from the shadows. Sergeant Vale, a scarred veteran with eyes like steel, and Mara, a communications officer who had never seen the front lines. Both had heard his story, and both had chosen to follow without orders. No one spoke much as they moved through the fog. The alien patrol routes Daniel had memorized were their only safety hours. Later, they reached the rusted skeleton of an old battlefield littered with the remains of alien machines. Daniel stopped here, his gaze locked on a half-buried object, a curved piece of armor thrumming faintly with energy. It was older than the invasion, older than the current alien fleet. Vale knelt beside it, tapping the metal with his knife, and the sound it made was deep, almost alive. Mara set up a scanner, and the readings made her breath catch. Whatever this was, it carried enough power to vaporize a squad in seconds. Daniel's hands moved quickly, dismantling panels and fitting the alien components to his rifle. The weapon hummed differently now, heavier, faster, more dangerous. They tested it on a distant ridge where a cluster of alien drones patrolled with a single shot. The weapon cut through all three drones in a blinding arc of light. Vale let out a low whistle. And for the first time in weeks, Mara smiled. The alien tech worked, but the strike would not go unnoticed. They moved quickly toward the energy station, knowing that once inside, they could overload its core. Daniel's mind played the alien, broadcast again and again, hearing the laughter, hearing his name dragged into the open. The thought sharpened his focus until the cold and fatigue disappeared, as they approached the edge of the enemy zone. Alien searchlights swept across the hills, their beams slicing through fog and ruin. The three crawled low through broken concrete until the towers of the station rose before them, blue light spilling down like water from the sky inside the station. Alarms began to wail, and Daniel knew they had been seen. A voice echoed in the distance, not just any voice, but the alien commander himself, giving orders in a tone laced with hunger. "Find him alive. Bring me the weak human." The gates opened, and armored hunters stepped out, their weapons glowing. Like molten rock, their movements were faster, more precise than normal soldiers. Daniel realized these were not ordinary troops. They were bred for tracking and killing. He signaled for Vale and Mara to split off, drawing the hunters toward himself. The chase began through metal corridors and shattered walls, Daniel firing bursts of the alien-modified rifle, forcing the hunters to slow with each trap. He set explosive charges on fuel lines, collapsing a walkway to block pursuit, yet the hunters kept coming relentless as the storm that began to build overhead each step closer to the station's core brought Daniel deeper into the alien stronghold, until at last he stood before the reactor chamber. The glow so bright it hurt his eyes, he could hear the hum of the shield network stretching across the sector. He set his pack down, pulling out the charges, but before he could arm them, a shadow fell over him. Heavy footsteps echoing through the chamber and the scent of ozone filling the air. The alien commander stepped from the darkness, his fanged smile wider than Daniel had ever seen it. "The weak human," he said, as if tasting the words. "I warned them. You would crawl back here now. I will end you myself." The storm outside roared, like a living thing shaking the alien station's walls, while inside the reactor chamber, Daniel stood face to face with the commander, whose towering frame blocked the only exit. The alien's armor was slick with rainwater, his molten eyes burning. In the dim light, and the cruel smile never leaving his face behind him, Daniel could see the shimmer of the reactor's shield, a living wall of blue energy, pulsing in rhythm with the massive core that powered the alien fleet across the sector. The commander's voice was low, almost calm as he circled Daniel, speaking of human weakness, of all the worlds his kind had crushed without mercy, and of how this war would end with Earth nothing more than a memory. Daniel kept his rifle raised, but his mind was moving faster than his trigger finger, searching the walls for vents or conduits, anything that could be used as a weapon. The commander moved with slow, deliberate steps, clearly confident that his prey had nowhere to run. Vale's voice cracked in Daniel's earpiece, telling him that he and Mara were still alive, but pinned down by hunters in the outer corridors. Daniel needed to end this quickly. He took a step back toward the reactor panel, the alien's gaze flicked toward the motion, and that was the opening Daniel needed. He fired not at the commander, but at the ceiling above him. The blast shook the chamber, sending shards of metal and thick cables raining down. The commander staggered, and Daniel dove behind a coolant tank, his movements quick as he armed the first charge. The alien roared the sound like grinding stone and hurled a piece of debris that smashed into the tank. Daniel rolled away just before it exploded in a cloud of freezing vapor, blinding them. Both for a moment, he crawled toward the maintenance shaft he had spotted earlier, slipping inside and sliding down the narrow metal throat until he emerged in a lower level of the station. Here the air was thicker with heat, and the glow from the core lit the narrow walkways in harsh light. Vale and Mara reached him minutes later, their armor scorched from close fights with the hunters. The three pressed forward deeper into the station, Daniel planting charges as they went, using the alien patrol patterns he had memorized to stay ahead of pursuit. But the commander was relentless, his voice echoing through the comms, ordering every alien in the sector to converge on the station's heart. Daniel's traps slowed them, but could not stop them in one corridor. An alien strike team dropped from the ceiling, their claws cutting sparks into the floor. Vale met them head-on, his rifle barking fire, while Mara hacked into the security panel, locking blast doors behind them. They reached The final control room. The window looking out at the core's massive structure, Daniel began wiring the last charge directly into the power conduit, his hands moving fast despite the heat. But then the entire room shook, the blast doors behind them buckled and tore free, and the commander stepped through, unscathed, eyes burning with fury, his weapon in one hand, a curved blade in the other. Mara tried to cover Daniel, but the commander's speed was unlike anything they had seen. He moved like a shadow, cutting through her weapon and knocking her aside. Vale lunged, but was caught by the throat and thrown into the wall. Daniel had no choice. He grabbed the modified rifle and fired a full charge at point-blank range. The blast sent the commander crashing into the far wall, but he rose again, smoke curling from his armor. Daniel's comm crackled with static as the first of the charges detonated somewhere deep in the station. The lights flickered, alarms wailed, and the reactor's hum became a scream. The commander charged through, the chaos weapon raised, and Daniel stepped forward, meeting him in the center of the room. The storm outside breaking through shattered windows, rain and lightning spilling into the fight. Lightning tore across the sky as rain flooded the shattered control room, and wind howled through the broken windows. The alien commander's blade caught the flashes of light, each swing a blur of molten steel. Daniel met him head on his boots, sliding on the wet floor as the modified rifle roared with bursts of searing energy, each shot forcing the giant back a step but never stopping him. The commander moved like a predator, his strikes heavy enough to split the floor panels, and every blow came. Closer than the last, Vale staggered to his feet, blood running down his temple, firing short bursts to keep the hunters outside from pouring in. Mara crawled to the control panel, fingers flying over the alien interface, trying to drop the station's shields so their fleet outside would be vulnerable. Daniel's breathing grew ragged, his muscles screaming, but he did not step back. The commander taunted him, calling him a fragile creature who had no place in war. Daniel ignored the words, his eyes scanning the floor until they landed on the thick conduit running along the wall, the same conduit feeding the reactor. He ducked under a blade swing, rolled across the slick floor, and jammed the rifle's muzzle directly into the conduit. The shot ripped it open with a shower of sparks, the entire room shaking as arcs of blue lightning exploded outward. The surge struck the commander full in the chest, his roar of pain rattling the walls, but instead of falling, he surged forward, grabbing Daniel by the throat and lifting him off the ground. The alien's molten eyes burned into his as he growled, "If you destroy this, you destroy yourself." The reactor's scream was louder now, the station shaking as the charges planted earlier began to go, critical. Daniel's vision blurred, but he still managed a faint smile. "That's the point," he rasped, before slamming the activation trigger on the detonator. Vale's shout barely cut through the roar of the blast as white light swallowed the chamber. The force threw Daniel back through the broken window into the rain, the shockwave ripping apart the control room above him. Mara's scream echoed as the floor gave way under her. Vale grabbed her at the last second, hauling them both toward the emergency shaft. The explosion ripped through the station like a chain of fire, each charge feeding the next. The blue glow of the reactor collapsing in on itself as the shield network across the sector flickered and died, alien warships in the sky. Above reeled as their protective barriers vanished. Human ships hidden in the clouds dove into the chaos, guns blazing, the alien fleet unprepared for a sudden counterattack. Daniel hit the ground hard outside the station, the rain drenching him as pieces of burning debris rained from the sky. His ears rang. His chest ached with every breath, but he forced himself onto his knees, watching the battle overhead. For the first time in years, human ships tore through alien lines, the balance shifting. In seconds, Vale and Mara stumbled out of the collapsing structure behind him, their faces pale with exhaustion, but alive in the distance. The alien commander's figure emerged from the fire, his armor blackened, one arm hanging useless at his side. But his steps still steady. He stopped in the rain, his gaze locked on Daniel. No words passed between them, just the silent promise that this was not the end. Then he turned, vanishing into the smoke as human forces pushed deeper into alien territory. Daniel lay back against the wet ground, letting the rain wash the blood from his face, the roar of battle fading into the distance. But he knew this was only the first step. The war was far from over, and somewhere out there, the commander was waiting for another chance to finish what had begun in that storm. Lit chamber, smoke still clung to the battlefield hours after the alien station's destruction. The air, thick with the scent of burned metal and ozone above the clouds, glowed faintly from the ongoing fight. But the worst of the alien fleet had already fallen without their shields. Their warships had been ripped apart by human firepower. In a victory no one had dared to imagine, the outpost that had once stood in the shadow of the alien advance was now a forward base buzzing with wounded soldiers, medics, and the constant thrum of engines. Daniel sat on the edge of a cot in the medical tent. His uniform torn and his ribs wrapped in white bandages, he ignored the medic's warnings about rest, his eyes fixed on the flickering holoscreen in the corner. It showed footage replaying across the galaxy, the alien broadcast network once used to mock humanity, now unwillingly carrying the same message again and again, images of the station's collapse, the alien commander's hunters falling, the human counterattack sweeping through the sky, and Daniel's face bloodied but unbroken. The voiceover called him the ghost of the battlefield. It was meant as an insult from alien lips, but to humans it became something else entirely. Soldiers who passed his cot stopped to nod or clap him on the shoulder, words spreading fast through every unit, morale soaring like a fire in the dark. Vale entered the tent, his arm in a sling. Mara close behind, still limping but carrying a datapad. She handed it to Daniel without a word. The screen displayed intercepted alien transmissions. Most were chaotic reports of their losses, but one line stood out. "The commander lives, and he swears. The weak human will die by his hand." Daniel felt no relief in knowing his enemy had survived, only a steady, cold focus. This war was not finished. The outpost commander approached him. With news scouts had confirmed the alien fleet was retreating, regrouping somewhere beyond the sector. But they were not leaving empty-handed. They had taken human prisoners and resources. During their withdrawal, Daniel's orders were to rest and recover. But the thought of those captives sitting in alien cells tightened his jaw outside the tent. The sky rumbled with the sound of departing ships, human vessels now chasing the fractured enemy across the void. Yet somewhere beyond their reach, another shadow moved. Mara brought up a final piece of data from the alien system's, fragments of logs and encrypted coordinates hidden deep in the station's core. They spoke of the enemy Daniel had overheard before, an unknown force. The aliens themselves feared one that was drawing closer with every passing. Vale frowned at the screen. "If this is real, then we are not done. Not even close." Daniel stood, despite the pain in his side, stepping out into the cold air. The battlefield stretched before him, smoke drifting over the ruined hills the humans had won this day. But it felt like the opening move in something far greater. He thought of the alien commander vanishing into the storm. The promise in his burning eyes, the sense that their paths would cross again, and when they did, it would not be in defense, but in a battle neither of them could walk away from. As night fell over the base, the stars above seemed sharper, brighter. The silence between the rumble of distant guns filled with the weight of what was coming. Daniel adjusted the strap of his rifle and walked toward the command post. Each step, slow but certain. They had called him weak. They had laughed and pointed to his name as a symbol of failure. But now they spoke it with fear and respect. And soon another name would be whispered across the galaxy, not as a warning from enemies, but as a rallying cry from allies. Because this war was no longer just about survival. It was about proving that even in a galaxy built for the strong, a single human could change the battlefield forever.